Thank you very much. I feel like I'm among family here. I really do. Surrounded by veterans, I feel so at home. I feel so comfortable now in the cannabis space. We have veterans that have showed up from Canada who came down just to spend some time with us here, and we have a special relationship. I think there's a level of camaraderie that grows there that I think is unparalleled. And I'd like to talk about that just a little bit today. I appreciate your time. I want to say thanks very much to the Emerald Science Conference team. They've put on given us a phenomenal opportunity here. Thanks very much to Jules Sinclair, who's just been working her tail off, Ken Snoke, Wes Burke, Cliff Beneventi, and the incomparable Dr. John Abrams. Thank you very much. You're very inspirations to me. And I'm really grateful to have this platform. I'm humbled to have the opportunity to kick off this important conference focused on the science of cannabis and the technology that's going to facilitate the research of this plant. I want to say also welcome to California. All right, this is my home state. I really feel at home here. I love coming back here. I love seeing California and how the bravery of activists changed cannabis policy here in 1996, which began a policy evolution that broke out across the United States and now around the world. And it all happened right here. It was the bravery of gay activists in California in 1996, those like Harvey Milk, Dennis Perrone, Richard Eastman, coupled with powerhouses like Jack Herer. And I'm really honored to be in the room. I think I'm maybe here with some Herer lineage, and I know that they sponsored much of the event, so it's really cool. I keep a signed copy of The Emperor Wears No Clothes on my bedside, actually. So it's pretty cool. They were responding to the loss and suffering of their friends at that time, and it was just too much to bear for them. So they risked their freedom, they risked their reputations to come to the rescue of their comrades. And it's something that's similar to what we're doing today. In many ways, my own life has followed the arc of cannabis policy evolution. I was born here in California in 1970 when another Californian, Richard Nixon, began the war on drugs. In 1996, the same year I graduated from West Point, California legalizes cannabis for medical use. Take that bold step to legalize medical cannabis. And then on January 1st of 2018, I was officially retired from the Army, and my home state of California legalized cannabis for adult use, really bringing true freedom back to my home state. So it was pretty cool. But now I call Kansas City, Missouri my home, all right? And I'm really proud to say that I was part of legalizing medical cannabis there, and we're doing big things in the heartland. It's fantastic. As you've likely concluded from my bio, I am not a scientist. I am not a doctor. I'm just an old soldier now, but I think I've got something to say. So I went to West Point. There, I was trained under the banner of duty, honor, and country. I was inspired to a lifetime of service to this nation, and I feel like working in the cannabis industry is my calling, to be perfectly honest. I consider this to be how I serve today. So given my experiences in the Army and my understanding of the power of the cannabis plant, I believe that I have a voice to lend to this discussion. Veterans have a voice to lend to this discussion. And we have a duty to pursue safer and more effective methods of treating veterans and military personnel who suffer from the wounds of war, both visible and invisible. As a veteran now, I find myself as part of a greater population that is in the midst of a health crisis, right? It is marked by elevated suicide rates. It is marked by mental health concerns, substance abuse issues, and addiction. All right, so today, I can't purport to speak for every veteran that is out there today, but I'm gonna give you the view from my foxhole and tell you some things that I think that can happen. First, I wanna thank Doug DeStasso for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to work alongside him. I want to congratulate you, Doug, for being named as the Executive Director of the Veterans Cannabis Project. I'm very proud to serve as a board member there. I'm now the director for the Midwest, where we're really trying to pull research back into the heartland and kind of change the center of gravity in the way we look at this new medicine. And you know, Doug, he's an Air Force Academy grad. He graduated from the same year that I graduated West Point. He graduated from the Air Force Academy. He served the nation as a special operator for a number of years. I think it's classified. He is now working tirelessly to bring about policy changes every day by waving our flag in Washington, D.C. Thank you for those who participated in the golf tournament yesterday. Those funds go a long way to help us make that happen. If I could have the next slide, please. Sorry. This is us in Washington, D.C. on one of our recent trips. You know, we're there, we're giving politicians and decision makers and leaders a great reason to say yes to more cannabis research and to providing access to medical cannabis for veterans. Have the next slide, please. This is us. We go around, we tromp around at the veteran service organizations. We talk to decision makers and leaders in the space. Next slide. To include folks like this, we get audiences with the Veterans Administration. This is us with the Chief of Research and Development. All right. The Veterans Cannabis Project was founded by my good friend Nick Etten. You can see him on the left side of that slide there. He's a Naval Academy graduate. You know, no one's perfect, but he's a Navy grad. And the Veterans Cannabis Project, you know, what he's created is really turning out to be an influential instrument in cannabis policy at the federal level. All right. I believe that it's because the creation of the VCP and the execution of what we do, it comes from a place of great purpose for us. It comes from a sense of duty that we have to protect those, to take care of those who have served. All right? And because our time in the military as leaders, we also care deeply about the families of those who have served. All right? We keep in mind the often serious cascading effects that pain and trauma and the effects that those will have on families and the communities in which they live. Could I grab the next slide, please? So, I think I would be remiss probably if I didn't mention that West Point is the holder of the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy for the second year in a row this year. Thank you. Yeah, we had a long dry spell at Army, but we're making up for it. So 2 years in a row, we own the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy. This means that the U.S. Military Academy has beaten both the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy in football. All right. I say this not only to gloat just a little bit, because Doug's here and I'm sure Nick's going to hear this, but you know, I want to bring us to the football field. Part of our training at the military academies is participation in athletics. Right? This instills in us a sense of the interconnectedness between competitive athletics and military action. Right? It is as simple as the struggle, the tactics, the engagement on the strategic level. And football, of course, is has a long tradition at the academies. The Army-Navy game started in 1890. Is one of the most traditional and enduring football rivalries in college football. Next slide. General Douglas MacArthur, probably all heard of him. General Douglas MacArthur, himself a superb athlete, serving as the superintendent at West Point back in the day. This is after World War I. He identified so clearly the relationship between the competition on the football field and the way it would translate into combat on the battlefield. He told us, on the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds that on other days, on other fields, will bear the fruits of victory. So we have a very close connection to football and to combat, right? Next slide, please. There's no other forum that I can think of that has a clearer representation of today's modern gladiators and warriors. Next slide. On the second Saturday, every Sunday of every December, the football field is where gladiators from both the U.S. Military Academy and the United States Naval Academy meet to, to perform combat on one another. This will translate one day to the battlefield where they will serve as warriors. Next slide. It is also the field where men engage in competition that is a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. Professional athletes, they are our modern gladiators. So on the football field, they risk their health and arguably their lives over the long run, over the long haul, for our entertainment. And the warriors are our modern-day soldiers. On the battlefield, they do our nation's bidding by putting their lives on the line as part of duty to our country. Both of these populations are at high risk for suffering from long-term health issues, from traumatic brain injuries, from chronic pain, post-traumatic stress, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, just to name a few. These populations are also at very high risk for addiction to extremely addictive opioids and other commonly prescribed drugs. I believe that we are in a position today to change the lives of veterans, football players, men and women affected by these debilitating conditions. And indeed, we have an ethical duty to do so. Next slide. So, how does an Army colonel get involved in cannabis? Right, I get this question a lot because it's not really a traditional path. In Afghanistan, I was serving on what was called the Commanders Initiatives Group. It's an interdisciplinary team of State Department diplomats, military personnel, and civilians. And our mission was to provide strategic advice to the coalition commander. This was the largest military coalition that has ever been assembled. Among other things, we were asked to develop innovative solutions to transform the Afghan economy using the country's available resources. I proposed the use of hemp. I thought that this, as an element of the Afghan economy, would provide a replacement for the widespread cultivation of opium. And a bonus to the whole thing would be that cultivating hemp around cannabis that's grown for high THC would cause cross-pollination, reduce THC levels, and everyone would win because the Taliban would not be able to get exorbitant profits coming back into the country, which often end up in the form of IEDs and fund terrorist activities. So at the time, I thought it was genius. It really fell on deaf ears, not because I wasn't working for incredibly intelligent and capable leaders, but because it was just a bit out there, I think, at the time. But it was there that I really point to that as the seed that was planted for me. I became so interested in everything revolving around cannabis. I'd never found a subject that was more fascinating on so many levels and had such deep impacts on our country and on the globe in general. Its history in the United States charts a path, beginning with the devastating social justice implications of our prohibition of the plant. It is rooted in racism, it is rooted in greed, and often illogical, fear-mongering, and uninformed political arguments. I mean, the social justice impacts alone, coupled with the potential health impacts on our society, merit focus and concentrated efforts of the entire global community. This includes international organizations, federal, state, local governments. This includes academic institutions. This is a call to duty. Our future must focus on the as yet untapped, transformative possibilities, the potential in this plant. We have to focus on this now. So we're seeing, as states begin to legalize the adult use of marijuana, we're beginning to see positive outcomes in job creation, in revenue generation, in research opportunities, and of course on a scale of social justice impact that we've never seen before. We are building an industry from the underground up, right? This is an industry that has always existed and will always exist, all right? It is amazing to see, as many of you are already doing, I'm sure, what it looks like when you apply modern scientific tools and techniques to a plant that we have been unable to study for far too long. So I'm really excited to hear some of your findings. I'm really excited to see some of the technology that you all are working on. Today, we find ourselves in a position to facilitate meaningful research and then to amplify medical outcomes of cannabis. By creating opportunities for interdisciplinary, multinational, collaborative groups, we can synchronize research agendas. And with the support of powerful partners at the federal level, including but not limited to the Department of Defense, and in national influential institutions like the National Football League, for example, we can make visible the results of this research. So, I believe that with this conference, with the incredible roster of scientists leading sessions on significant topics, we're talking here about cannabis genomics and chemotyping, genetic sequencing. We're talking about standards and practices, pharmacological strategies, new ways to cultivate the plant, to process the plant, to extract the plant. All of these things we weren't even able to talk about before 1996, I would say. You know, it's fascinating to watch this whole thing emerge and watch it unfold, and it's nice that we get to be right here in the middle of it. These are vital. These are vital things for us to make forward progress on the study of this plant. I see this as our ethical responsibility. I see this as our duty to our planet and to our species. So before I left the military, you know, I struggled to see at first really how the skills that I had developed in the military would translate into this industry. But I realized pretty quickly that the skills I developed in the military are the same ones that I deploy in the cannabis space, and that I think are going to make me and make many of us successful in the space. These are ones that we were taught all along that, you know, our imagination was our only limit. So we really don't base limits on the things that we think we can do. We were told to think critically. The Army and the military in general is filled with critical thinkers. We think critically about complex issues so that we can come up with really creative solutions to apply to them. And that's what we seek to do in the cannabis space. There are few issues that I can think of that are more complex than that of veteran suicide and to the nation's opioid crisis. The two combined resulted in 12,000 veteran deaths last year. 12,000. Beyond that, opioid overdoses cost the lives of almost 70,000 Americans in the United States last year, resulting in, for the third year in a row, a reduction in the life expectancy rate of the American citizen. That's an emergency. Now that's a national emergency in my view. Cannabis can help reverse this situation. This is no longer an assumption. This is a fact. This is not an assumption. This is what we know from our experience in 33 states now that have medical cannabis. And this is what we know from our brothers to the north in Canada, right? The first G7 country to take the bold move to legalize cannabis for adult use. Full stop. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, next slide, sorry. I probably should have a clicker. Even the FDA, right? Many of you know this, I'm sure, but even the FDA holds several patents on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants, as an antioxidant, as an anti-inflammatory. And this particular triad comprises, ironically, the three things that would be most useful to combat traumatic brain injury. This is what the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, calls the signature wound of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. This leads me to my passion project. My passion project is the Athena Protocol. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. I've named this project after the Greek goddess Athena. Maybe some of you know her. She is the goddess of military victory, of good counsel. She's the goddess of knowledge. I only know about her really because her helmet is on the crest at West Point, right? So I saw that for 4 years, and we learned a lot about her. The Athena Protocol is really a four-phase strategy that we have developed using non-impairing cannabinoids to mitigate and treat traumatic brain injury. And we believe that there's a potential that this could have the same application to prevent and treat chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which, as many of you know, is what so many of our football players are suffering from. The protocol really wants to harness the neuroprotective, antioxidative, and anti-inflammatory effects of non-impairing cannabinoids. We want to administer this as a prophylaxis and as a treatment to traumatic brain injury through a series of phases. This would include administration of non-impairing cannabinoids on the battlefield following an injury, right? Following a suspected traumatic brain injury at the point of injury. I developed this protocol in the memory of a lieutenant that I lost, who had served under my command for 2 years, and after I left command, my unit deployed to Iraq. Captain Andrew Houghton, who was from Houston, Texas, he was an exceptional young officer. He was a West Point graduate as well, class of 2001. So when Andy threw his hat in the air at Mikey Stadium just 5 years after I did, in 2001, it was just months before the attacks of 9/11 thrust our nation into what is now our longest lasting conflict. Andy was struck in the head by a rocket-propelled grenade that did not explode, but gave him a serious traumatic brain injury. Our battlefield medicine has increased so much today that our soldiers were able to stabilize him on the ground and evacuate him. 5 weeks later, I linked up with Andy at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. I met his family. I told him what an amazing officer he was. We pinned a Purple Heart on his chest, and then the next day he passed away. So that's Andy, but there are many more like him, and I think that we might be able to, prevent or reduce the severity of traumatic brain injuries, and perhaps increase the survivability of soldiers in combat, so other soldiers don't have to lose their lives and other families don't have to lose their sons and daughters. It is scientists and researchers like those of you in this room that can help us with this technology, that can bring all of this to bear on the cannabis plant. You're the ones that might help us advance more research like this. So where are we now? We are firmly in what we in the military call the adaptive space, right? This is a concept that we train our officers on at the Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I last worked. It's based on some groundbreaking work by a gentleman named Michael Arena, who did this for GM. This leads organizations to become more agile and to embrace disruptive forces as positive accelerators. Cannabis is that disruptive force. The adaptive space exists in between and intersecting an entrepreneurial space, an entrepreneurial operational realm. And in short, it is the adaptive space that exists between the Prohibition period and where research was really stifled, I think, to put it lightly, to a place where cannabinoid medicines can be prescribed with predictable outcomes. It is the place where we will soon get to apply the most complex plant that we know of at some of the world's most complex health issues. In this space, if people collaborate freely with parallel objectives, real growth happens. True organic innovation can emerge. And that is where I think we are today. In order to develop a deeper understanding of how cannabis medicine might be applied to some of the most complex issues for our time, I think there are several things we need to do. Next slide. All right. We need to really focus on reducing barriers to research at all levels, but from the federal level on down, and we need to encourage multinational research because so many countries have advanced beyond what the United States knows at this point. We need to develop clear protocols for cannabis, all right, methods of administration, titration levels, formulations. We need to create that environment so that we can conduct the research on the predictability of cannabis's effects on the prevention and treatment of injury, illness, and disease. We need to conduct research on dosing, which I'm happy to say that I know the Emerald Conference team is working towards today. We need to demand that our medical schools are teaching about the endocannabinoid system and the most advanced studies and the most current studies on medical cannabis. Finally, I think that the Department of Defense is uniquely positioned as the ideal organization to lean into medical cannabis research. The veteran community represents the largest patient population in the United States. The DoD has over 1,200 healthcare facilities nationwide, including 170 VA outpatient site, or VA medical centers, and over 1,000 outpatient sites of care. These serve over 9 million enrolled veterans annually, 75% of whom say that they would like to have access to medical cannabis as a treatment option. The two largest veteran service organizations in the United States, the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri, and the American Legion, they've all made demands for increased cannabis research part of their national platforms. So it really just makes sense to me that the military would lead this effort. The military has a long history of driving medical advances, including the discovery of penicillin, the development of plastic surgery, advanced treatment for amputation. All of these stem from necessity. They're a response to necessity. We are now in the moment of necessity, more than ever. We are now in a moment of necessity, and we need the Department of Defense to step up and get past the stigma of cannabis, look at medical cannabis as a creative way to address the veterans' health crisis that we are in today. I'm confident that cannabis will become an effective tool for the military medical community to address veterans' health issues. If they were to commit to understanding the full potential this plant possesses and dig into the science, they would definitely become the leader. And I believe that we would reduce healthcare costs for our nation as a whole. I feel like if we focus science, technology, and minds with clear vision and purpose, we can maximize innovations in this adaptive space. And this must happen now. It is a crisis. In the military, next slide, please. Sure. In the military, back. Let's go back. That's the crescendo. In the military, we spend a lot of time learning about revolutions in military affairs. We talk about this a lot in our training. This is to say how small changes or inventions impact warfare. These include the advent of the stirrup, for example, that allowed us to fight while mounted on a horse. It is the advent of the rail lines to speed military transport and change the way we conduct logistics. It is the invention of the computer. It's the satellite. It's GPS. It's all of this. These are all military revolutions in military affairs. So where are we today? I think that we are square on the precipice of an authentic paradigm shift that will be seen as a true revolution in medical affairs. I think that one day doctors will look at one another and they will ask themselves how the hell they ever treated patients before they had cannabis. Even today, medical cannabis we see is saving lives. It's improving the health and the well-being of patients and their families and their communities. It is my goal to ensure that this happens within the veteran community as well. So I think we are really lucky to be operating within the cannabis industry today. In whatever role you might be playing, I hope you recognize you're part of something very, very special. I don't think that there is any other industry that has such a line of compassion and generosity that runs through it. So while the rest of the world gets to watch the shifting of this paradigm, we in this industry, we in this room, we get to push it, we get to drive it, we get to guide it. We get to make this into the form of something that we can be very proud of, something that is representative of our great country. I think we're creating an example for other industries to follow. I get that question a lot. What industry do you want to be when you grow up? We want to be the cannabis industry, and we want others to look to us for how they should act. We spend a lot of time discussing this plant. This is for good reason. For many of us, we consider this something that saved our lives, or maybe the lives of someone that we loved. For most of us, though, I think we're inspired by this plant, by the bounty we believe that it possesses, and because we believe that it can revolutionize the way we treat patients and how it might improve the health and well-being of our species. What will make this all possible, beyond the science and the technology, is the people. That is why we're gathered here, to interact with one another, to create connections that might help us advance medical science, help us help us deepen our understanding of the cannabis plant and how we might deploy it. We are here to promote collaboration among nations, among institutions, and people. So I'm sure that many of you have experienced the deep friendships that develop around this plant, through the study of this plant, or sometimes through the communion around this plant. One particular individual that we've spoken to already, but I would really like to mention Steve Baugh, who was a part of my team. He spoke here last year. He passed away suddenly about 10 days ago. We still don't know why. He was an accomplished chemist. He was an inventor. He had several patents. He was a husband. He was a father with a genius mind. But most of all, Steve was really our friend, and he was our colleague and our teammate. His passing, in my view, is a great loss to the scientific community. We'll miss him dearly, and I just wanted to offer my condolences to his family. So my goal for this address really was to inspire this crowd by pointing out the need for greater research of cannabis and perhaps to introduce you to some of the struggles of the veteran population so desperately in need of safer and more effective treatments for the wounds of war. But I think you already know that, all right? I think that we're all well aware of the potential for cannabis to serve as a life-saving medicine. I don't think we'd be here if we didn't all understand that. So in the end, I believe what I'm trying to do is to inspire our country. I'm trying to inspire them by significantly reducing the barriers to research of cannabis. I think that access to this medicine and the ability for scientists to research it should be considered not just a human right, but a duty. I think we have a duty to explore it. So during one of my recent trips to Washington, D.C. with the Veterans Cannabis Project, I visited the American Academy of Sciences. I went there to pick up a copy of a recent publication that they put out. I guess it was last year now. It's called The Health Effects of Cannabis and Cannabinoids and the Current State of Evidence and Recommendations for Research. Right, this is a phenomenal report. It gives a broad set of evidence-based research conclusions on the health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids, and it's highly scientific, so I encourage you to reach out and take a look at it. But what I was struck by, really, I guess, next slide. What I was struck by was this quote on the outside of the building. It was Albert Einstein saying, the right to search for truth implies a duty, and that one must not conceal any part of what one has recognized to be true. And I found this quite compelling. In this, I think that Einstein was really challenging us to search for truth with integrity and with purpose, and to share that truth with the greater good. I think this is really an appropriate way for us to begin this proceedings this week. I hope to harness or enlist the intellectual power and the scientific capabilities that are represented in this room and in this conference today, so that we can search for the truth. I can't wait to search for the truth with you and share it with the world. I implore this group to join me and so many other veterans who are working toward this to find solutions to address the healthcare crisis that we're in today. I would like to invite the Department of Defense and others to join us in helping facilitate that research. I believe that if we fail to do so, it would be disrespectful to the veterans who have served the country, and I think it would be very short-sighted for us to not dig into it. In short, I think that the DoD has a responsibility. I think that we in this room have a responsibility. I think, in short, we have skin in the game. So thanks.